Yeah. Hello, hello, and welcome to yet another exciting episode of Skeptics and Seekers. I'm your host, David the Skeptic. I'm joined today by my good friend Andrew. How you doing, Andrew?
Yo, what's up?
Not the
I
kinds
shouldn't
of
have
things
asked
that I
that.
were. Yeah,
Yep.
that's gonna be awkward already. So today it's time to talk about sex. Let's talk about sex. This is an extremely important topic. And I wish we had some experts on the panel to talk about it. This week, it's just going to be Andrew and I kind of setting the stage and opening up Pandora's box uh, and just kind of airing out all of the issues. We're not going to find answers to them today. Heck, we're not going to find answers to them over the series, but we will find many things to argue about. Um, it's a tough subject. It's one of these subjects where I don't actually have the answers to the questions I have. I've got questions and I've got some ideas, but I don't have any answers. And so over the course of this, I could be persuaded toward any number of directions. I think it's just a difficult subject. It's something that I've been kind of studying behind the scenes for a number of years, and it's one of those things that I realize that I don't know what the heck um, the truth is here. I just feel like as a society we're doing it wrong, but it's hard for me to get more specific than that. And so we're going to try to get more specific with that today. We've got a set of topics that we're going to cover. We will have a couple of panel discussions, and then we'll see if I can't get Brian back to help with a wrap up. If you hear some scratching on the door, that is my dog trying to get in. So apologies for that. I'm going to turn it over to Andrew to have a first bite of the apple while I kill my dog. Excuse me.
Um, okay, so we've got a little audio feedback. Give me half a second to kill the audio feedback. And we will listen for David to kill his dog. Sorry for the inconvenience. Okay, so what are we going to cover today? I guess is the first good question. So here's an outline of if you're listening, what you can expect today, and hopefully we'll get through all of these points. Skeptics and Seekers often runs long, and David and I are known for egging each other on. But here's what you may expect through the course of this podcast. The first thing that we will likely cover is, why is sex such a big topic in and out of theology? Why does it take up so many mental cycles for most of us? Why is it such a premier topic in everything we do? The second point that we are likely to cover has to do with consent and age. So we all know the first rule of safe sex, right? Use contraceptives, but we rarely talk about the second rule of safe sex, which is keep yourself out of jail. So we're definitely going to spend some time there. We're going to spend some time on things that we don't often call sex, but are sex acts. So this will be anything that is not your traditional missionary position sex. And the last point,
also all the non-binary,
right, LGBTQI plus, right. So the last point, if we get to it, which may be transition to from point 3, is what about pornography? Pornography may come up in the first 3 points sort of naturally, but we're going to leave some space, if possible, at the end to cover pornography on its own. So, David, you're good at kicking these things off, and so I'll leave it to you to get us started.
Okay, good. And my dog is very much alive still. Just not in a condition where he can beat on my door for the next hour. Don't worry about him. He's fine. He's all right. He's okay. He's been alive for 17 years. I'm not going to stuff him out now. so
User.
uh, so what I want to say before we get started, this is not an opening statement, but it is an important statement to make. So if you're used to the way we talk on Skeptics and Seekers, we are often irreverent and occasionally profane, but hopefully never obscene, if you can finely dice those differences. But today we're going to be blunt without blushing. So this is a podcast where we are going to talk about sexuality like grown-ups. Some of it will be a bit blue, I'm sure. We will say words that some will find offensive, and if you listen to this show around small children, this is a good show for you not to do that. Put on your headphones. If you do not mind your children hearing the types of things that people say when they're speaking frankly about sex, then great. But this is just a PSA before we really kick things off. So I will give you a few seconds to make your adjustments, and then we will move on with the show. All right, then. So the first question that I have is, why is human sexuality such a big deal, especially in religion? But I don't want to single out religion. It's also a big deal in pagan religion. It's a big deal among people who have no religion, maybe slightly less, but it still takes up a lot of space, a lot of oxygen in the room. And I, for one, would like to wrap my head around why that is. And I honestly don't know the answer, but I have some thoughts. And so I want to take the first idea of theology, because I actually believe that most of it comes from theology. I think that a lot of even people who are not religious, I think that theology has so affected the culture, and sexuality is one of those issues that resonates with so many people. I think that it has kind of set the tone for it a little bit, kind of like in marriage. Why do so many people who don't believe in God have weddings that look a lot like Christian weddings? It's because religionists have won the fight, essentially, and they have in fact infected the culture with some ideas that I think are pretty bad. But they're bad, and they've bled into the culture, and it's just a part of the culture, and it's hard to get that stuff out when it's embedded in so deeply. And so my first thought about this is that thoughts about sexuality are in fact largely impacted by theology. So before I go any further, I just want to do a quick check with you, Andrew. Do you mirror that idea, or do you want to push back at this point? Do you think that theology plays an outsized role in our thinking about sexuality?
I do, and I want to cover in. I want to color in one specific.
I lost you. I don't know if it's me or you, but I didn't hear a word you said just then.
Okay, can you hear me now?
It's you,
Hello?
David.
I can hear. Oh, can you all hear me?
Can you hear me,
All
Andrew?
right. I'm gonna
Yes, I can.
stop you. I'm gonna stop you there just a moment. I'm just gonna ask any of the lurkers so I can figure out whether it's me or you, because I might have to change my setup a little bit. Did any of you hear Andrew?
Yes.
Fully just now. Got a thumbs up from Dale. So looks like I might be having some Wi-Fi / audio issues, and I don't like to edit. So, Andrew, feel free to monologue
Okay.
for just a couple of minutes, and I'm going to change my headset and see if that helps.
Okay. So one of the things that I found interesting as you were talking is that while religion plays an outsized role in the conversation about sex, it does so in a way that I think is particularly interesting. So the divide between those who practice theology of any given stripe and those who don't practice theology is not that sex is not important to both groups. It is, but it's important in very different ways. So, as largely a humanist, as a skeptic and a humanist, I would promote things like better sex education, things like better access to reproductive rights for young women, more open access to contraceptives. So these would be things that I would think we ought to all be able to agree on. But at least in some religious circles, and very often those very conservative circles, what we see is exactly the opposite. There is a push not to grant better reproductive rights to young women. There's a push not to include sex education in schools. In fact, the Catholic Church has a long-standing tradition of fighting against contraceptive measures. Now, I realize that's not all Catholics and it's not the entire Catholic Church. And I'm not raging against Catholics specifically. What I am saying is that there is a clear divide theologically from theologians rather and skeptics in regard to how we treat the idea of responsible sexual behavior. So yes, to answer your question, David, I think theology plays an outsized role, and I just want to color in that county on the map because I think it deserves a greater conversation as we
So
go along.
let's take a couple of minutes to explore that, since we both came from not just religion, but a very conservative kind of religion. The question that no one ever asks in those kinds of religions is why on earth God cares about what you do with your genitals. And the first time I heard anyone ask that question, I was probably late 30s. It never dawned upon me that this was a strange fixation for a God.
Right.
Why should it matter what we do as consenting adults with our body parts? And once the question entered my consciousness, I couldn't shake it, and I still can't.
So it took me a long time to get past that point too, where, so we have this idea as very conservative Christians that the God that you and I were familiar with, and I think by and large the Orthodox view, is that there's this God who can number every hair on your head. He can watch every sparrow fall, right? He can count all the grains of sand on the seashore. So he's quite a powerful God. And if you're infected with that idea, then you do just accept that this guy who is lurking in the back of your mind cares about what you do with your genitals, but he cares in a very strange way.
It's almost incomprehensible. Let's just jump to the one that jumps to our mind first, because I know it does for you. Circumcision.
I had a different one. Well, okay.
Did you? So
yes,
I just want to start with circumcision because it's so embedded in the Jewish culture and then more broadly the Judeo-Christian culture, and this idea of we're gonna chop off your foreskin because foreskin bad. I don't. People used to try to come up with some kind of medical reason why circumcision is a good idea, but it all kind of rang hollow to me. And it seems like the best medical science today is it makes no difference at all.
Right. So in a world, perhaps, so try to stillman the Jewish argument. And yes, I said Jewish, not Christian. Christians, if you adopted circumcision, you did it from the Jews and perhaps from the Muslims, even though you don't want to admit any of that.
I was circumcised.
Right.
For the record.
So I was not.
I've been cut.
Right. I have not. So here, it's one of these. If you live in a country today where there's clean water and reasonably good sanitation, it is largely unimportant. Now, perhaps there was some sense in it in the past. I don't know enough of that history, but surely the Gentiles had some awareness, right? And why do we think they did? Well, there were a lot of Gentiles. There were more Gentiles than more Jews. So not getting circumcised didn't change the course of human history all that much. But here's another reason that circumcision is strange. Let's say that it was to prevent disease. Let's just go all the way with the Jews and say, hey, you know what? Your God was a pretty smart dude. He wanted you to be cut because it prevents some kind of infection. Okay, that sounds pretty good, right? But here's the contradiction. He didn't tell you how to avoid any STDs. Jews still get STDs.
Yeah.
So it's still strange. And that was the first thing that came to my mind is this God who cares about human genitalia, cares about it only in the sense that he wants males to be circumcised. But he doesn't tell you particularly how to avoid STDs. He doesn't tell you how to identify them. And so maybe you say, well, by following very conservative rules, you narrow down the possibility of STDs. That is not the same as good medical advice for how to identify and avoid STDs. And if you think it is, it's because you are selectively biased toward the idea of your God.
Well, I mean, the God of the Old Testament wouldn't have cared about or the New Testament either, wouldn't have cared about avoiding STDs, because if you were a virgin until marriage, you wouldn't have any. So why should he help sinners out? I would also say on the subject of circumcision, is everyone familiar with the Orthodox Jewish practice, the classical way of doing it?
I am. It's disgusting.
It involves the mouth of the rabbi.
It is oral sex on an infant. Sorry, that's pretty awful.
It is awful, and I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that they didn't get that from God. But apparently God didn't give them any instructions about how to do it either. So he didn't seem to care about that part. Just get it off, however you do it. So I
By
don't
the way,
know.
I'm willing to say, let me just walk back what I said a second ago. It's probably not useful to raise the emotional temperature in the room because this conversation's already going to do that. So I want to walk back what I just said and say that I am perfectly willing to admit that Jewish rabbis who were practicing circumcision in the Orthodox way with male infants about a week old were not getting any gratification out of the process. And so you can't really think of it as oral sex either for the rabbi or the infant. What I am saying is no matter what you call it, biting off the foreskin of an infant is reprehensible. And I don't care who you are or what the reason is.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to be that gracious. I don't know what people get gratification from. I will just say that if that's the method that your God approves for it, you have some explaining to do. So,
and he didn't require circumcision for girls.
Right, which is of course possible. And no, we can be thankful because that's another level of hideousness as far as I'm concerned. female circumcision. If you do not know about female circumcision, look it up. It's a real thing. Still happens today.
Equally reprehensible, and it should stop.
Right, but it's not really in the front edge of what we're dealing with right now. The God that we're most concerned about did care about this aspect of genitalia, and it was never clear to me anyway why it was a concern at all. And so we can kind of retcon it and say, well, it's because of sanitation, health reasons. But that's just us talking out of our ass.
Of course it is. He didn't require, for instance, brushing teeth as a commandment for sanitation. Right?
There's so many other things he could have done if sanitation was the top of mind issue. So
imagine those rabbis, right? There are diseases of the mouth, or at least the mouth is heavily bacteria laden, even if it's not a disease, right? And so you would expect, if this was an important ritual in regard to sanitation. So you and I often talk about the absence of evidence not being the evidence of absence, unless you would expect some evidence in this. Well, I would actually, if you think that circumcision is for some kind of cleanliness, for lack of spread of disease, I would actually expect this ritual to have the priest who is practicing in the Orthodox way to do some very rigorous mouth cleaning before they go and circumcise an infant.
Sure, and we can just go ahead and retcon that God gave the instructions on how to clean your mouth. You can Christians can do all kinds of retconning. And I dismissed female circumcision a moment ago because it wasn't really top of mind for me, but I think it does have a link. So the primary purpose for female circumcision, we don't have to guess at that, is to keep girls from growing up into women who enjoy sex. It's to literally hinder the enjoyment of sex. And it's a way of controlling the women and ensuring, maybe, with the circumcision, they won't run off and have an affair. They will. So there's a lot bound up in that, but it is directly related to sexuality.
And the Orthodox way, it borders on profane. Let me just say that if you think this topic's important, and in some sense, I hope you do care about it. I hope you care enough about this subject, dear listener, to understand what is being done to young women in very religious and very backwardly religious parts of this world. I hope you care enough about this subject to go and research the Orthodox way that female circumcision is done today.
All right. So moving on though from circumcision, the fact is, this God, whatever the reason, I can speculate on the reason, but I'll withhold from that. This God, at least God of the Bible, does care about sex an awful lot. Has a lot to say about sex, and we haven't even begun to speculate on why that is. So, for instance, a fairly normal thing for humans to do, even Christian humans to do, is have extramarital affairs with other people. And it happens with women and men. They both do it roughly at the same rate. So the God of the Bible saw that as a major problem and decided to fix it by saying anyone caught in the act of adultery is to be murdered. That seems extreme. Does that sound extreme? Or is it just me? Sex as a death penalty offense. Now, rape as a death penalty offense. That would make sense to me. I think I could get behind that. We're talking about garden variety, um, mutual, consensual sexual relations between adults that don't happen to be married to each other at the time. God's reaction to that, the electric chair. So, what what do you think?
Um, okay, just give me the question in summary one more time. Just
I don't know if
say
I
it.
can sum it up. What I made is in a very acerbic comment. God cares about sex to the degree that if you do it outside of the way He wants you to do it, He'll kill you. That was the law. Commit adultery, you're put to death. Death by stoning, I think, is the
Right,
prescription.
right. So this is another one of, oh, okay. This is, so that was true, I think. This, I don't remember whether adultery was a death offense in the Old Testament.
It was very
Okay,
specifically,
okay.
yes.
And the death offense in the New Testament, though, there's the example of Jesus saying, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." Okay, so
Yeah, but
so
the
maybe
important thing is to know about that is Jesus didn't change the law.
right. He just
he may have
invited
saved
introspection.
he saved one woman, and by shaming a mob, but he didn't change the law. But let's be clear about this, because I don't even want to let that infect the conversation. That is one of those passages that everybody agrees is not actually original to the text. That was an add-in. We don't need to make that a part of the theological discussion. So just stop
Well,
it.
and okay, and just to give the conservatives a little ammunition, one of the easy games to play here is the context game, right? Well, Jesus is really saying, "Let he who is without adultery cast the first stone." So he's inviting introspection, but he's only inviting introspection about this specific thing, right? So there's you can carve these passages any way you want. And if you think I'm wrong, just consider the landscape.
Yeah, and I refuse to address it. I just refuse to address it, because it's one of those things. It's like talking about snake handling in Mark 16. The Christians would say, "Oh, well, that's not really a part of the Bible." So the same is true for the passage that you were
Sure.
talking about, the woman at the well. So I just refuse to give it any credit at all.
Well, and somehow, women still have had a rough 2,000 years in the Christian church. So
one gets the sense that this was disproportionately used against women in the Old Testament. I can't prove that, but one gets that sense.
I can prove it. Take war brides. There were no women taught to take war grooms, right? Women had an awful time.
Sure.
Look, it goes further. Some guy rapes some girl, and what is one of the outcomes that the Jewish God promotes? Marry your rapist.
Sure. So I'm gonna leave that also, just because it's incendiary, and I think it might take us off track too far. But my bigger point here is that God does care about sex. In the New Testament, He cares about sex as well. He cares about sex in marriage, and it's important to not have sex outside of marriage. Now, an interesting thing, a few years ago on Unbelievable, there was a show about the purity culture, and there were a series of shows, and I can't remember any of the guests at the time, but even the conservative that was on that particular show that I'm thinking about did not object on the basis talking about premarital sex. He did not object on the basis that the Bible says it's wrong. The consensus is that the Bible actually doesn't say it's wrong. It doesn't directly forbid it. But when you read between the lines, it would be an impure act. So it's kind of an interesting question. On the board, skeptics and seekers.squarespace.com, just log in your Discuss account. When you see this post come up, tell me, Christians and former Christians, did you understand sex outside of marriage to be a sin? Yes or no? I want to hear that from you. But there does seem to be this focus, I will say, that sex is something to be done in marriage, and that there are instructions that your body is not your own, and that you can't deprive your partner except for a short time, when you're devoting yourself to some religious purification. So maybe fasting or something like that. But outside of that, you can't say no.
Right. And so I'm going to take a further step so that we don't drag on this thing, and talk about some kinds of sex that are forbidden in the New Testament quite directly. So we can move over to Romans chapter 1. You're as familiar with it as I am. Those dirty guys laying with men. Romans 1:27, right? They've left the natural. This should offend you whether you're male or female. It's left the natural use of the woman. And two guys having sex, they deserve to burn.
Yeah, so there's that. It would have been nice to have some very clear laws against pedophilia.
I'm not sure the Holy Spirit could forbid pedophilia given Mary.
I'm gonna let that pass too.
You're really not going to let me light any fires, are you?
No. If you're thinking about the obvious laws, if you're getting a list of prohibitions around sex, things that a God might say about sex and what you should and shouldn't do, rape and pedophilia should be at the top of the list. It's not entirely clear that those things are actually wrong. And if the Bible is your source, I mean, you can put together some passages and come up with an idea that it is, but thou shalt not have sex with a minor isn't there. So that would have been nice.
It doesn't. War brides were a real keep the virgin girls.
I know. I understand. I get it. I'm just. You see, for all of the attention that God paid to sex, it just seems like he missed some things. And so we can step outside of religion here, because I would say that religionists are not the only culprits. I do think that it starts with religion, but it has infected the culture outside of religion too. And the fact of the matter is, as an atheist, I don't believe that there were any gods that said anything. So we invented gods that care about sex. So we still have to address that. Why? What is it about us humans that needs gods to care about sex?
Okay, so a lot of times, this is true for, I think, largely all of our instincts. We have, if we perceive some instinct as negative, and this extends even to food, right? We have an instinct to eat, and the Christian God, well, at least the Jewish God, cared about what you ate, cared very much about what you ate. So all of our instincts are heavily religiously moderated. This is true of sex. It's true of eating, and there may be other instincts. It's true of how we prosecute wars. I don't know if that's an instinct, but certainly fight or flight is an instinct. So gods get involved where we have compulsions. And while this is not quite, it's not the right show to talk about compulsion. I do think that we have often used religion where we lack other understanding to moderate what we might see as a negative compulsion. And so I'll leave that as an opening, as a step in an opening thought.
Okay, well, I think that's a good idea. I do want to have a show on compulsion. It's not going to happen this season, but that's something that I would like to do. I think it's very important. In fact, I'll see if I can get Val in on that discussion, because that's going to be a deeply philosophical conversation as well. So I'm going to agree with that insight without taking it much further, because I have to do a lot more thinking on the subject of compulsion in general. But that seems intuitively correct to me, but it still doesn't answer the question then, but it's just a doorway to the next question, which is why have we adjudicated this compulsion, I'm forgetting how to say words. Why have we adjudicated this in such a negative light, with so many restrictions and so many taboos around it? Sex it's a bodily function. We have a lot of bodily functions, and we have some taboos perhaps around some of the bodily functions, but sex is a kind of a taboo thing in almost every culture. And so is there just something natural about shame? Are we ashamed of nudity? Are we ashamed of desire? Or what is it that we're ashamed of that would make us say that this act is both dangerous and bad and should only be taken with the greatest of care?
I wonder if there's a popularity issue here. So we're pretty sure now that about 10% of the population is going to be homosexual. Now, I don't know if all of the LGBTQI plus community falls into that 10%. We are only now being allowed to open up the sexual conversation in public and to really do a lot of research about what gender identity is. And by the way, gender and sexual identity are not at all the same thing. Your sexual preferences and your gender preferences don't necessarily have anything to do with each other. But what I am saying is, in the past, because the majority of people prefer heterosexual sex, as far as we know, that seems to, I can see how that would morph into, if you're not doing it this way, you're doing it wrong. And it becoming a prohibition, even without the introduction of a code.
In a small culture group, a small social group that depends on breeding to survive, anyone doing sex in a way that guarantees breeding doesn't happen, I suspect would be that there's some natural reasons why they might think that's not such a good idea. However, in a tribe where there are too many men and not enough women, I would think that homosexuality would be welcome, because it would reduce the competition.
And our sexual instincts are quite strong, aren't they? And so I don't know about you, but I do have a list of sexual acts and people that I wouldn't have sex with, right? That feels somehow, I don't want to say wrong, because I don't think of sex as right and wrong in that way, but certainly as something that I wouldn't prefer, something I would give a hard no two. Sorry, just leave it.
I
Walk
think it
past
would be a soft no, but go ahead.
Yeah. So I asked you to go past it, man. You just couldn't leave it, could you? So there are sex acts and people that I would say no to with no reservation, an unlimited no. And I think that those strong emotional responses can also be interpreted as my God says this is bad, and if you do it, you're bad.
Yeah, I think so. My speculation is there's some real evolutionary reasons to why we evolved gods that were conservative about sex. Um, in the first place, if you're once again, you've got to throw your mind back to a time when we're dealing with small tribal groups. In fact, maybe even nomadic groups. Um, So why wouldn't there be a command that says thou shalt not rape? Well, they actually need it to do that. They if you look at just the Jewish culture in scripture, I'm not trying to pick on Christians, sorry. I've read the Bible, not responsible for it. Um, but if you look and you see where, okay, well, this tribe, they don't have enough women and they have too many men, and the solution is, okay, well, you go over here to this tribe and you conquer them and you snatch yourself enough women so that your men will have wives, right? I mean, so you can't actually have a coherent law that says thou shalt not rape. That wouldn't make any sense. You also can't have any coherent laws that say thou shalt not have sex with a minor, because their lifespans were very short, and they had sex with whomever was sexually mature. Sexual maturity happens at about 12 or 13. So you can't, such a law from such a God wouldn't make any sense. That said, it does make sense to treat your women and daughters as property. And so it does make sense that this God would view sex in terms of property rights, as opposed to some other things. And so I think that it's driven largely by evolution, whether you were into the gods or not. And I would just say that today, if we're inventing gods for today, or if Judaism was started today as opposed to 4,000 years ago, I dare say the laws would look very differently, because the world is very different. And we don't have small tribes anymore that depend on everybody doing their part and procreating to stay big and strong. What we have is an overpopulated world. It's not even a matter of competition. We've got enough men and women to go around for everybody. Competition is not a problem today, but overpopulation is a problem. So I think that we would have a God with very different mores for the gods that are invented today.
So one of the things that you promised in the beginning of the show is to just open these topics up and that there would be panel interviews. If you're okay with this, I'm going to use a question from the lurkers, a question from those who are participating in the chat room. Thank you to everyone that is participating. Is it okay to give their names? Is there anybody that doesn't want their name offered?
No, you can give their names. Chucklehead 1, Chucklehead 2.
Okay, so we have a Brian. This is Brian with an I, participating in the chat room, and he said something that I think is a great transition out of the early theological discussion into point number 2, having to do with legality and consent. So Brian wrote that that sex is a bodily function, and some people think that it has psychological, emotional, and spiritual implications. So I guess I want to start by saying that masturbation is a bodily function, feeling good is a bodily function. Sex, however, is a function between two or more people. And so while I agree with the idea that I think you were expressing, I disagree with how you wrote it. Sex is not a bodily function. Sex is an act between two or more people, whereas the desire for sexual gratification is something that we can fulfill on an individual basis.
Okay, so we're getting into some semantics here, but the semantics may be important. Dale is in the chat. Dale, I saw your thumb go up. Did you have anything to say on that part? Since you've read most of the Bible now, and so maybe you have some just some thought that we missed, or that you think we misrepresented.
Okay, so in the first place, I was just putting my thumbs up to Andrew that you're allowed to mention my name or something if you want.
Okay, Chucklehead 1. What is you?
Oh,
We'll just call you
sorry.
Dale.
Just so the audience knows, me and David Russell are kind of messing with David and Andrew here in the chat. So
And they get what they deserve.
they do it to us. I mean, you see there.
By next season, we will have the chat on screen so that people can see the abuse we take.
But yeah, so what's what was it? The topic about different dimensions, right?
Well, yes. Theologically speaking, I think the broader topic is why do we invent gods, or why do we have gods that even care about sex to begin with?
Yeah. So yeah, I think I would like to hear. Well, again, from your guys as two skeptics, you don't care about the Bible and that sort of thing. But as two former Christians, maybe you guys can speak to why did you guys as Christians think that the Bible cares about that? Was it just something you had no clue about? In my own case, I have my sort of answer as to why I think he cares about proper sexual relations and that sort of thing. And it has to do with harm, as to what Brian was saying, on this spiritual dimension. If it causes spiritual harm to us and that sort of thing. So that's my answer as a Christian, but I want to throw it to you guys. What did you guys think as Christians? Why did God care so much about this? Okay,
I'm going to go first. Andrew, you're too slow. So
I'm reading the chat room.
Like I said initially, the question never crossed my mind until my late 30s. In fact, it didn't cross my mind. I just heard someone ask it, and I couldn't answer it, and I still can't. So it was one of those things that kind of changed my thinking just to hear the question. It makes no sense. Now, this is the part that we haven't talked about, and so you're right to bring up the spiritual dimension, and it's somewhat why I want to go into definitions before we move into our next topic of what we're even talking about when we talk about sex, because I think that there may be an additional component to the conversation that I am ill-equipped to discuss. So I believe that sexuality is a purely physical thing. Then again, I believe that everything in the universe is a purely physical thing. So I am a hard materialist in that sense, and philosophically speaking too. So I don't know how anyone would demonstrate something that's not material, or that is merely a description of material, or a relationship between two things that are material. So that said, there's no spiritual dimension of sex. I don't even know. I mean, I don't even know what I would have thought that meant when I was a Christian. It's just a thing that you grow up with and you hear people saying. But what is the spiritual dimension of sex? I have no idea. As an atheist, I got to tell you, it just sounds like utter nonsense to me. There's nothing spiritual. There's nothing metaphysical. There are things that are emotional about it, but all of that happens inside the body in physical ways. There's nothing about sex that happens outside of the body in some non-physical way. And so that's how I would answer that question.
I did have an answer to this by the time I got to college. I don't know when I first started really thinking about this deeply. And oh, by the way, I should say that the quote that I attributed to Brian with an I, he was quoting you, David. So
Okay.
apologies to Brian with an I. I not only strawmanned him, I just completely falsely attributed to him. So apologies there. So it's your fault, David. And that'll be the theme for the rest of the show. It's your fault, David.
Be.
Okay. So I think I'd have answered the question very differently. I don't know if it's very differently. I'd have said that the primary purpose for sex was not enjoyment. And the New Testament, as far as I know, the Old Testament talks very little about sexual gratification, sexual enjoyment. Certainly we have the
Have you read the Song of Solomon?
I've just... Okay, I just said very little. I just said very little. And the Song of Solomon is as much a love poem as it is a poem about sexual gratification. So, I think to get to sexual gratification in the Song of Solomon, you have to do a lot of reading between the lines, just like we do, if we're looking at soft porn or whatever.
I would also say that the Song of Solomon is some scholarly opinions is that the Song of Solomon is not about sex at all.
Right, that's what I'm saying. You have to
read
read
here in a metaphor.
Right, you have to read between the lines to get there with the Song of Solomon. But so, what I thought sex was for, quite honestly, was extending the boundaries of the kingdom. You have a baby to grow the church. And that's it's pretty well carved out, isn't it? So fathers, raise your children in the Lord, train up a child in the way he should go when he's only one part. What was sex for? Sex was to have children, and you had children to grow the borders of the kingdom. And that's where I stood on the issue. Now, look, it was a great way to extend the borders of the kingdom. But if you think I'm wrong about this, why does the conservative church, and I'm not calling out a specific denomination because many of them have this view, and I'm not calling out all conservative denominations because they don't all share this view, but to the extent that they do, why is there not good sex education on something as simple as masturbation? Why would masturbation ever be prohibited if sex is not only for one thing, and that's to have children so you can offer them up to God?
Right. So I would also say before Dale comes in, the passage you're thinking about with Onan, we often call masturbation onanism. Well, actually, we don't often call it, but
I never call it that, but I'm familiar with it.
Right.
Yes. So.
That is how it is sometimes referred to by people who don't want to say masturbation. So it got its name from a fellow named Onan, and his brother, I want to say his older brother, died, and so as per Jewish law, his brother's wife was passed down to him. And it wasn't just a matter in the law of you've got to financially take care of this woman. You had to sexually take care of this woman too. You had to bear children, have her bear children. So it was a sexual relationship that you had to have, and this doesn't matter whether you had a wife or not. So otherwise, legalized polygamy. Come at me, bros, and sister. But yeah, so in this one story, Onan did not want to sire a child by his brother's wife because of their tribal structure or whatever. Maybe then this child would inherit as opposed to his other children. I don't know the details of why, but he didn't want to do that, and so he had sex with the woman. But he pulled out and blew his load on the ground. And so that is what is referred to as onanism. And we have since kind of associated masturbation with that act. And basically, all it is a sex act that ends in a non-productive orgasm. That's literally what we're talking about.
Right. Well,
there. And so, one last thing: Onan's punishment for this was death. So,
right. Well, and we have the same issue around discussion of female masturbation, and it's not clear that they should even be in the same discussion. There's no actual example of a female being prohibited from masturbation. But my understanding,
what she couldn't do is refuse to have sex while she was ovulating, saying, "Well, I don't want to have a baby, so I'm not going to have sex." She could not do that.
Right. Put a pin in that for a second, because what I am saying is, my understanding from past girlfriends throughout my life and other relationships, and even the one I'm in now, is that women don't get any better education about masturbation than guys do, and women can't spill their seed on the ground. So they don't have the same issue that an onan has. And so I think what I'm pointing out is that whether we're talking about boys or girls, we do a terrible job as a society, especially the religious component of our society, of talking about self-gratification.
Okay, Dale, I wanted you to finish your thought there. You wanted to know our thoughts. I think that yours probably be more interesting. This is what happens, though, when you let us go first. So go ahead and round out your thought there. I don't want to lose it. And then we'll move to bullet point number 2.
I tried to drag us over there 20 minutes ago. You refused.
Not yet. We're almost there.
All right. Okay. Yeah. So cool. Yeah. I just wanted to get your answers, particularly, like, obviously I know as atheists, you guys are going to be physicalists and that sort of thing and not take on that spiritual dimension aspect. But I was interested as Christians, how did you answer? And just kind of, I guess, say yes quickly or something. So David, I think for you, you didn't know. It was just an arbitrary command. God commands it, so we do it, kind of thing. You didn't have an answer. Okay. And Andrew, for you, it was related to, it's got to be related to procreation in order to be good or something like that, like proper procreation.
Yeah, that was my understanding in college. I think probably I evolved past that after college. But yeah, that was my understanding then. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I guess my take on that, again, why God has these commands is because it's related to spiritual harm. If you have sex outside of a proper context of being married between a man and a woman and that sort of thing, it causes spiritual harm to the person. And that's why things like homosexuality or fornication or adultery are wrong. And God, these have powerful spiritual aspects and create spiritual effects on us. It's not just physical and that sort of thing. So that's my explanation as to why I could say God isn't just giving arbitrary commands. He's giving commands that are for our own good. They come with a purpose, and God knows in what context sex is good for us and what context it's harmful for us. In terms of Andrew's point, I would just sort of say I understand why a lot of Christians think it's all about procreation, or at least during your time in college, the Old Testament is definitely preoccupied with that dimension, and that's one of the main aspects for it. But it's about more than that. It's about bonding and having that relationship, becoming one flesh and that sort of thing. That's another main purpose. Another main purpose is pleasure and stuff like that between the spouses. So it's multi-dimensional, the purpose for the and goodness of sex in a proper context and that sort of thing. So it's not just one aspect or another.
I'll tell you where we can agree. So I could use the word spiritual here and just mean that sort of transcendent experience that I think is actually a physical response. So, but I'll say, rather than spiritual, in order not to muddy the water, I'll say emotional experience. And there's actually a place where you and I agree. There's a place where we don't agree. I'll start with that. If you think bad sex can't happen in marriage, you haven't looked at the divorce rate. And so it's not the case. It's not the case that keeping sex inside marriage means good sex. It doesn't. So I just disagree that God knowing what's best for us means sex inside a marriage, because there are plenty of people that are living in awful marriages that include their sex lives. So that doesn't get me far, but I'm willing to accept that we disagree. Where we agree is that sex has an emotional component. I wouldn't say spiritual, but I think it does have an emotional and psychological component. And in fact, we know what some of those chemicals are. We know about norepinephrine. We know about oxytocin, right? And we know about their connection to sex. And so to that extent, we want sex, I think, by and large. Well, those of us with a roughly normal psychology, we want sex to be something that gratifies both people, right? We don't want sex to be that thing that harms. I don't think there's a God, but I do think that Christians are pushing a line that is trying to guarantee a good sexual outcome for two people. Frankly, a marriage contract doesn't do that, but I am willing to grant that that's what Christians want. So I hope we can get some agreement in there. I tried anyway.
So we're going to table this conversation for the panel, and I assure you, I'm not satisfied with saying that, because I want to rejoin, but I want to get to the next topic even more than I want to rejoin. So put a pin in it, and we'll get back to it next week when we have a few more people to discuss. So we've introduced the issue. And I assure you, I will pick up with some comments that follow this line of thought. So the heart of this topic for me is the next bullet point here, which is the matter of consent. And it is the most difficult part of the conversation for me. The rest is pretty easy for me. It's all fun and games. And it's fairly inconsequential to me, frankly. I mostly don't care what you think about sex, or what kind of sex you want to do, or whether you want to do it in marriage or out of marriage, or what your God says. Don't give a damn. But we all have to give a damn about consent. And so the first thing about consent is, what is it? So we were going to define sexuality before we got here. So we'll try to define sexuality while we're here. But we also need to define consent, because it's easy to say that sex is something that happens between two consenting adults.
Two or more.
Sure. But that doesn't mean much if you don't agree on what consent is and what all it entails.
Or what
it also
constitutes
doesn't help.
adult, by the way.
Well, you're right, and it also doesn't help if you don't agree with what constitutes sex. So just as an example, masturbation, some would say, is not sex. It's just self-gratification. But I suspect it's listed as a sex act. And it's something that can be done in the context of couples. They don't ever have to have penetrative sex. If it was something that you saw your kid doing, you would think sex, I think. And so it may technically not be sex, but it seems like sex to me.
Are you talking
but
about masturbation? I've lost.
yes, I'm talking about masturbation, but it's more than that. So, um, if, just keeping it in the context of couples for a moment, oral sex, well, that's got to be sex because it's right in the name, right? Oral sex. But it's not a penetrative sex, penetrating the area that we are talking about anyway. It's certainly not vaginally penetrative. But we would think of that as sex. Now, digital sex or fingering is uh, penetrative, but it's what we call that second base. I'm not sure. It's not a
Well,
home
it's
run.
pretty sure that's third base. Second. So according to 17 magazine, yes, for the sex show, I read a magazine for teens. Yes,
I don't want
I did.
I don't want your reading list, and I'm not going to link to it.
Well, you didn't have to. I just mentioned the source, so I should give a damn. According to 17 magazine, second base is anything that involves the boobs. So there you go.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
well, what we might call making out, at least what our parents would have called making out,
Foreplay.
or heavy petting,
Yep.
what is you have to be kind of old for these terms. What do the kids call it?
That
these
is
days?
mostly outer sex. Outer course. So intercourse is vaginal penetration with the penis. It may also be anal penetration
Right,
with the
but
penis.
kissy-
Those are intercourse. Outer course.
kissy, sucky,
is,
feely, gropey stuff. Some would say, well, that's sex, or some would say it's not sex. There are lots of things that you can do. Dry humping, sex or not sex?
Not
Looks
sex.
like sex.
It's outer course.
Well, once again, though, it depends on how you're defining it. So I understand that you have a particular definition about sex that only includes intercourse.
Not true.
But okay, well, it sounds like where you're going there. But I will say
okay.
that,
Well, I actually agree. I actually agree that oral sex is sex. So I didn't respond to that, but I think that's right, and I think
Okay.
Anal sex is sex. So yeah, you just had a misperception.
yeah. So I'm not actually gonna prosecute here what is or isn't sex, because I'm not sure that you can, because everyone has a different idea of that. Um, I Let me put it this way: if when I was 13, 14, 15, if I was caught heavily petting a girl in some quiet place, I never encountered a parent, mine or theirs, that was okay with it. So, they treated it like sex. And so from my perspective, I would call all of it sexual gratification. And I don't preference intercourse over other sexual acts when I'm talking about sex. So my when I'm talking about sex, I have a fairly broad view of what all is entailed in that, and my understanding is your view would be somewhat more narrow than mine when you're talking about sex.
Mm.
Yeah.
So okay.
So
I don't have any stake in what you think of as sex, and where I might differ.
Right. My only point in bringing this up definitionally is that as we discuss this and as it gets discussed on the board over the next few weeks, understand that you may have a very different idea of what you mean by sex than the person you're talking to. Andrew and I have known each other for a long time, and we're never going to agree on this. So definitionally, it seems that it depends on just your particular meta culture is how you're going to define it. And so I think a lot of things include sex, and I think it depends on who you are and where you're from. There are a lot of taboos around things that aren't necessarily sex. So for instance, dry humping, which Andrew wouldn't call sex, but I can assure you, every adult that I went to church with would demand that their kids repent from sex, for the sin of having premarital sex if all they were doing is dry humping. And if you're in a marriage relationship and you are dry humping and someone who is not your spouse, I'm pretty sure your spouse would probably consider it infidelity. And I don't know what the courts would say. I'm pretty sure the courts would probably agree. I don't know. I think it's just nailing down exactly what we all mean by sex is harder than it seems.
We've avoided innuendo. I'm going to keep avoiding.
Yeah.
So I think it's time. We spent a lot of time trying to define consent. I think we should keep trying to define that with some better ground rules. So in the run up to this show, I went over to hhs.gov. So that's Health and Human Services, and they actually
I'm gonna put this in the show notes when I actually write something up.
Okay, it should go in the show notes. So this is useful for every listener. Oh, actually, let me do something else first. This is my public service announcement to the community. This is a hard topic. Conversations about sex, about what it means to consent. These are difficult topics. People cross the lines, and people have the lines crossed. If you are in a situation where you need to talk to someone about something negative that happened to you, stop listening to this and go find someone to help. There's a national sex abuse hotline. You can chat with them online. You can call them on the phone, but you don't even have to look that up. If you have a hotline number already, if you've been in crisis in the past and you've got a hotline number in your phone, just call any hotline. The great thing about help hotlines is that they usually keep other hotline numbers. So the sex conversation is difficult. And if you've been a victim, be your own best advocate.
Right. And I just want to be clear. I know that I said we're going to talk about consent, but the reason that the definitions matter for this next section is because we're gonna talk about age of consent as one of the things that we're going to discuss. Well,
so it's going to get harder from here on out.
It's going to get real tough. And one of the challenges is consent for what? So if we're talking about criminal prosecution, I won't have much to say about that. I expect Andrew will have more to say about it than me. But if we're talking about criminal prosecution, and you're in one of these categories that we're about to talk about, where you have crossed the line age-wise, you're 16 and you are dating a 13-year-old. Have you committed a crime if you have not had penetrative sex? Just as an example, I don't know what the law is on that. So there's some legal definitions here that I don't have, and maybe Teddy will join us in the comments or on one of the panels and help clear that up. But
they're not the same in every
what we
state.
call sex matters is what I'm saying. Because if you do one thing with a 14-year-old, you're probably okay. But if you do another one, you're a criminal. And once again, depending on your age relative to it. So just this is all groundwork to talk about what we're going to talk about right now. So let's just get into it. So starting with age of consent, the question is, how old should one be before they are able to be considered consenting? Well, it's way lower than 25. Even though we know brains aren't formed at that point. It's actually 18, I think, in some places, but it's way lower than that in many. This is something that you might think is federally determined. If you're outside of the US, you might think that. Even if you're inside of the US, you might think that. It is not true. The answer to that question differs from state to state. So whether you have committed a criminal act or not will largely depend on what state you're in and maybe what state you're from and what kind of.
There are federal statutes. So there are federal sex crimes, but by and large, the sex crimes that happen between or sex or a sex crime that might happen between any two or more people is down at the state level, but there are federal sex crimes.
Right, but so you're dealing with two sets of charts, to be sure. But it's important for people to know that there's a state level.
I know. I looked it up. Right.
Yeah, in the 50 states do not agree. So you essentially have 50 laws on this, and so just the simplest. In the simplest of terms, what do we consider an age of consent where you can do what you want to with anyone your age or older, and it's not the government's concern? Right. 18 is one of the ages. Sometimes it's 17, sometimes it's 16.
16 is the majority of states.
It's the majority. I saw a lot of 16. But there's also some nuance.
So hold on before you get there, because we've got to be careful to find these things, because I don't have the chart in front of them, and I'm not using Zoom on the Mac because it was giving me feedback.
And I'm not going to open up the chart myself because I'll find it distracting.
Right. So when we say that among most states, 16 is the age of consent, what we're actually saying, universally for this chart that David's going to link to, is that at 16 or 17 or 18, there are a few states that have a slightly higher age. There are one or two states that have 15 as the age of consent. What we are saying is that a person at that age can choose any sexual partner regardless of age. Now, they may not be able, even in the United States, to choose the partner of their gender, but we are saying that at roughly 16, that's the majority of states, a person can choose a sexual partner regardless of the age of the partner if they are older than 16. So 16 is the age of consent to choose another partner of a consenting age, regardless of the partner.
Right. So if you're 16 and the age of consent in your state is 16, you can have sex with a 30-year-old. 30-year-old has done nothing wrong by having sex with a 16-year-old.
That's right. Even though we might find it creepy and probably should. So yes. So that is the age of consent, and you're about to get into the nuance.
Right. So even before we get into the nuance, just think though about how complicated it is to come up with that formula at all. Why do we consider 16 the right age for experimenting with sex?
I really think it's driver's licenses. I really do.
So I think that's probably true. I think there are cultural reasons for that. Yeah. And I'm gonna self-edit and not go into some of the culture talk that I had planned for this section, because we went a little bit long with the last one. This won't be the last thing I have to say about it. It's just be the last thing I have to say about it in this particular show. But yeah, I do think it's culture. But the fact of the matter is, sexual maturity, and let me just define sexual maturity for you the way I mean it. And you might have a different definition of sexual maturity. But when I talk about sexual maturity, what I'm talking about is for a girl, the ability to get pregnant, and for a male, the ability to make someone pregnant. And so the cycle can continue with sexual reproduction at that age. So whatever that age is, because it's going to be a little bit different for everybody. Some girls have been pregnant at 12. I think the youngest age a girl has been pregnant is preteen. It's very rare, but the body is very flexible and sometimes hard to understand, and it doesn't give us a good solid answer for that. But just as a general average, I'm going to say 13. By 13, almost everybody can either make someone pregnant or get pregnant. And so when I talk about sexual maturity, that's what I'm talking about. And so even if you put the age as high as 13, you're still talking about 3 years from sexual maturity to the time when we as a culture say, okay, it's okay for you to have sex. So what explains that disparity? What is a method that we should use to come up with an age of where it's okay to have sex? I don't know the answer to this question, by the way.
I do. We should use the
yeah.
Bible. The Bible should just give us. Oh,
no,
actually, it doesn't.
No.
Oh, sorry, David Russell. That didn't work out very well, did it?
No.
No,
But I'm going to throw the Christians a bone, actually, and say that I am sympathetic for cultures that put the age of sexual consent closer to 13. I'm sympathetic for that, and in only this way. This is something that Andrew and I argued about bitterly yesterday, so we will not rehash the entire conversation. I'm not even going to tag it with my usual "I was right," because I honestly don't know. But my intuition is that the biological age should be the stronger guide, but there are also cultural guides to consider too. So if in your culture the average age of death is about 40, you got a lot of life that you got to live from the time that you're sexually mature to the time you die. You've got everything is highly compressed at that point. So people would naturally not wait until they're 25, say, to marry. You're a grandparent by then. You're a spinster by 16. How come you haven't gotten married yet? So I think that there are, that there could be a certain configuration of culture, especially in the past, that I am not familiar with, where it may have been viable and reasonable for the sexual age of consent to be the physical age of sexual maturity. But in our culture, that doesn't make sense. But it does create an awkward disparity because our body is ready, but our culture is not.
Okay. So
you can have the last word on this. We've argued about it, so that's all I'm going to say about it.
Right. So this is an interesting one. I don't necessarily agree that because our bodies are ready, we're ready. So sex is not just bumping uglies. And because it's not just bumping uglies, because there is a psychological and emotional component, and because we're actually quite positive that our brains aren't finished developing until roughly our mid-20s, and because we do measure things like mental age versus chronological age, we can be quite sure that it is possible for someone to be ready for sex physically without being ready emotionally. In fact, as a result of human growth hormones in the American diet, over the course of the Industrial Revolution, it is the case that onset of puberty for girls has backed up about 2 years. And we have cases of the onset of puberty in girls as young as 9 years old. I'm not positive for boys, so it may be that the same is true for boys. I am certain of this detail for girls. And so I don't think any of us would defend the ground that physical readiness for sex in regard to puberty at 9 or 10 years old means, oh, wow, the person can all of a sudden consent emotionally and psychologically.
Yeah, so I'm not going to make that case. The case that I would begin to make and leave for later discussion would be the greater the disparity between physical readiness and the actual first act, the bigger the problems that there will be. So if you're physically ready for sex at 13, but your culture says, well, you've got to wait until marriage. So we're talking at least 18 now in some places. And if you defer marriage until after school, 22, the mess that your body makes of sexuality between 13 and 22 is not good. That's not a positive thing. And I would say that the delay, this rather artificial delay, does more harm than good. Not prepared to defend that right now, but I'll throw that out there for future discussion. Now, some delay is probably good. So maybe 16 is good, especially in a culture as complicated as ours. But again, I don't know. I don't know how we came up with the ages that we did, why some states think that 16 is good and others think it's 17 and others think it's 18. I don't know what the calculus is that brought people to that decision. But I would say that the longer it goes, the more chances of problems you have. So for instance, you're sexually mature at 13, but for whatever wackadoo religious reason, you don't have sex until you're 30, or you never have sex, but you're still sexually mature and you're not asexual. You've got a problem. If you go straight from your parochial school to becoming a Catholic priest, and you are a sexually vibrant person who has never had sex, you are probably a danger to people.
So the way we get these laws is politics is the art of the possible. That's how we get them. States have to deal with child predators. They have to deal with young adults. They have to deal with children who are ready. And then you get a whole bunch of people together in a room, and they try to come up with something sensible. And we certainly can't do it at the individual level, because how do you know what young person is going to be ready at 16 and which one's going to be ready at 17, right? Or younger or older. And so politics is the art of the possible. That's how we get these laws. What we haven't done yet is talk about what consent actually is. When you get two people together in a bedroom or a car or the woods or the high school bathroom or wherever they get together, what does it mean to consent? When does consent start? When does it stop? Who is responsible? We're still not there. We can leave that for a panel, and maybe we should, but this is the question of consent, and we still haven't gotten to it.
No, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on it today, but I do want to just put some of the issues out there. So in the chart, I linked to it. I threw a link in the chat room here. I will put it on the board at some point. But there's the idea of age disparity. So let's set aside the age of consent for a moment and go forward to the age where you have committed a crime, because there is in fact a huge difference between age of consent and you've committed an act with a person of an age where it's a crime. and they're a victim. So two 13-year-olds, to introduce this, two 13-year-olds can have sex and no crime has been committed. Even though the age of consent is 16, we'll just use that as an average. If you're in a place where the age of consent is 16, and you're 13, and you have sex with another 13-year-old, you have not committed a crime. However, there is a disparity that's baked into the law. So if you're, say, a 13-year-old girl and you have sex with a 14-year-old boy, that boy still probably has not committed a crime. At 15, probably not has committed a crime, but it depends on what the disparity, the age disparity is in that state. So if it's 2 years, if a 16-year-old has sex with a 13-year-old, that's a crime. Now,
however, it may not be a prosecutable, right?
That's right. I was just going to say, now, whether it's prosecutable or not is another whole set of laws, and states are going to deal with that very differently. But I will just say that it's a crime if there is a 3-year disparity and you are 16 and they are 13. That is where a crime has been committed. Any set of combinations before that, no crime has been committed, because both were under the age of consent, and it doesn't matter. It's like it doesn't count. However, the legal question that I have, don't know the answer, didn't look it up. Curious to hear what Teddy has to say on this, and anyone who happens to know the answer to it, don't just spitball an answer. If a set of, let's say, very liberal parents get together and they want their children to experience sex, and so they arrange or agree that, if their children find, each other attractive and they want to have sex, that they would simply make that possibility available.
Right. So,
because the sexuality itself is not a crime. But to the extent that it could be encouraged or enabled by an adult, is that a crime?
yes,
I don't know the answer.
I do.
Okay.
Yeah. So, it is possible. So there are statutes about lewd acts, as a for instance. So, let's say you don't ever. Let's say imagine someone who prefers children, but they never touch a child, and they never speak to a child. Is it still possible for them to do something sexual in regard to that child? Well, yeah, they can expose themselves, right? That's a lewd act, and it is punishable. In the same way, if you were to let's say you had a habit of leaving suggestive material for the teens in your house, and then you said, "Hey, I'm going to go away for the weekend, and I'm going to leave a bunch of beer, and I don't care if you have a drunken party, as long as I don't know, everything's fine." Oh, actually, that sounds like the 1980s, doesn't it? Yeah, it does. But today, you could, in some jurisdictions, end up in trouble for contributing to the delinquency. Now, the drinking part would be the easiest thing to prove, but if someone turned up pregnant, you might well be on the hook for not providing proper supervision.
So that's a little bit complicated to me. So the other question that I had, which probably covered under the lewd acts, but I'm speaking specifically about what would constitute sex under the law. So if a and let's just make it an 18-year-old has non-penetrative acts of physical gratification, things that I would call sex that Andrew wouldn't, with a 15-year-old, and we have the 2-year disparity thing Actually, I had an 18-year-old. I don't think it would matter anyway. But so if you have that situation, would the 18-year-old be guilty of a sex crime?
What did the 18-year-old do again?
Not vaginal penetration.
Okay, was there anal penetration? Was there oral penetration?
Not anal or oral penetration.
Okay, so you can be convicted for assault, simply by going up and we see this pretty regularly. We see this with politicians. He didn't rape me, but he couldn't keep his hands off of me. Right.
Yeah, but we're still talking, well, consensual.
Well, I'm answering your question directly. You're asking, can an 18-year-old be convicted of some crime for something that is short of a sex act? The answer to that is yes.
Yeah, but I just want to make it clear. I'm not talking about some type of assault. I'm just saying.
You're suggesting that maybe the 15-year-old was okay with the heavy petting.
Yeah, not maybe, definitely. In fact, 15-year-old may have been the aggressor. It doesn't matter. The only thing that matters in this scenario is you have two consenting people, but not adults. Under these laws, the 15-year-old would not be considered at the age of consent. And if it was a 17-year-old, there would be no legal issue at all.
Right.
But at 18, there's a legal issue, but I don't know what the legal issue would be exactly because there was no penetrative sex.
Right. The courts try really hard to duck these things. I don't know what all of the rules are, and it's impossible to know all the rules. Right. So we've got 50 states and the rules are different in every state, although there are some broad agreements. But this kind of thing happens in high schools all the time. There are plenty of guys who have birthdays in the wrong part of the year, right? And they're going to be 18 before they graduate or whatever.
Right. They started the Sex Act both 17 years old. And by the time it was over, one of them had a birthday and now they're going to jail.
Right. And courts try, they try their damnedest to avoid these kinds of problems. So what is consent? Consent is a thing you agree to.
Right. But it is not, we have to be careful because we usually say consenting adults when we're talking about sex. And the fact of the matter is sex has nothing to do with adults in that sense. The age of adulthood for a lot of these places may be older than the age of sexual.
Right. So on an individual basis, we've talked about the law. And clearly, whether a 14-year-old can give consent or not, there are places where a 14-year-old giving consent is not legal consent. Okay. So I'm going to take a second because we keep avoiding this, and I'm going to talk about individual consent as a way to open it up for whatever the panels have to say. The clearest form of consent is to agree to whatever is happening to you. Now, a 14-year-old can't, well, in some states, in general, a 14-year-old cannot consent to have sex with a 30-year-old. Right. And if you're a 30-year-old, hang it up with the 14-year-old before you go to jail. You're not practicing safe sex.
But they can consent to have sex with another 14-year-old. And even in that scenario, there could be non-consenting activity in there.
Right. And that's right. And this is the thing we need to address at an individual basis, at least so that the panel can talk about it. Consent is anything you agree to. Lack of consent is anything you say no to. Is there a middle ground? Yes, and that's why children shouldn't have sex. So if you're thinking to yourself, I don't even know if I want this. The answer is don't do it because you're still not sure. But in an individual sense, consent is anything you say yes to. Lack of consent is anything you say no to. And guys, because you're most often the perpetrators. No means no, and it means no starting at the moment that no is said. And if you persist after no, you're in danger of not practicing safe sex. You may hate it. It may be very uncomfortable to stop. You're still responsible for stopping.
So I want to take that another level, because I think that's important to say, but I think there's another level that needs to be said, and this will be far more controversial. And I have no idea how one would effectively do this if it were a law. But not only does no mean no, unsure means no. And so what I'm saying is, as a salesman, as someone who's spent a lot of his life learning how to manipulate people and make them do what he wants them to do, I suspect very strongly I could manipulate someone into having sex with me, and get some type of tacit consent. But it would still have been as a result of manipulation, and I would simply be taking advantage of someone whose will is somewhat weak.
And you could be in real danger there.
And so whether I win the court case or not is irrelevant, because sex is not something that you should sell in that sense. You should not push. You should not persist. If the person wants to do it as much as you do, great. And if they don't want to do it as much as you do, you shouldn't do it, even
Right.
if you could.
And to carry that thought on, consent is the kind of thing that is sex is difficult to talk about, and whether those reasons are cultural or evolutionary, or just because of the relationship you're in. If consent is something you're having trouble talking about with your partner, you probably shouldn't have sex. And here's why. If you're having trouble saying yes, you're probably going to have trouble saying no. It may not be as strongly guaranteed, but if you're having trouble voicing your consent, do yourself a favor and only put yourself in those positions where you can voice your lack of consent.
So I've got to say something to the ladies. This is just for the ladies. I'm going to become unpopular right now.
Well, that won't be unusual.
And say, I don't care what society says, you're partly to blame. You are, in fact, partly to blame. And you have to stop, you have to take ownership of yourself and your sexuality. And so what I mean is, no means no. But if you don't say no, and you're just counting on the guy to read you and then do the right thing, you are stupid. You are dumb as fuck. And you should not be in that situation. If you can't open your mouth and say, no, I don't want that, that's going to make it very hard for you to sue later. Because I'm going to tell you, when guys are in that moment and they're, both heads are full of adrenaline, they are stupid. They honestly are stupid. They're not pretending to be stupid. And then if they have a few drinks in them, they're even stupider. They don't know what your signs are. They're not mind readers. You need to say no. And when you say no, don't giggle. Don't be flirty. Don't be fucking cock teases. Say no and mean no. And if they are not convinced that you mean no, say it again. Stick to it so that it is very clear that you mean no. And yeah, because I'll tell you, most guys don't want to wake up only to find out, oh, you didn't actually want it. They are stupid, so they may not know it at the time, but you can at least do your part and make your no clear. All right.
So I'm gonna walk some of that back.
Well, you can disagree, but I mean every word of it.
Yeah, I am going to disagree. I have no doubt what you mean. I happen to know from some hard conversations that there are some things that happen to women where they don't have any choice occasionally to try to laugh it off, to try to slowly turn down the environment. Guys are most often bigger, and very often they are scared. At least 3 times in my life, I've had this conversation. Let me give some statistics. In the United States, 1 out of every 5 boys will be sexually assaulted before the age of 18. I didn't say raped. By the age of 18, 1 in every 3 girls will be sexually assaulted by 18. In the United States, 1 in every 1.5 handicapped children will be assaulted by the age of 18. Young guys, pushy, demanding, and girls sometimes try to laugh it off and say no gently because saying no hard doesn't seem safe. And so you say no however you can. The important note is to keep your no registered. And as a slightly separate aside, crime scene number 1 is always better than crime scene number 2. So if you're saying no and you're being grabbed, fight for your life there, because you don't ever want to end up where someone wants to take you. Slightly different. This is that's a self-defense tip rather than a consent tip. But fight for your life at crime scene number 1, because crime scene number 2 is worse, and they are slightly connected. And sometimes fear and nervousness cause you to laugh. The important thing, guys, is no means no.
Right. In the thing I'm saying, no means no. You've got to give that no, because silence doesn't mean no. Flirty laughter doesn't mean no. No means.
But
no.
I know when flirty laughter means no.
Well, you might, but not everyone will, and I don't know that holds up in a court. Look, I understand that there's fear involved when something goes south in a way that you didn't expect, in a setting that you didn't expect. But that thing has gone south, and at least one time in that process, you need to register that you didn't want to do it, because you don't want to ever leave someone with the ability to say, I never got any indication that she didn't want to do it.
No is that indication. And I am not overly interested in whether it holds up in court, because what we're talking about here is not just whether some assault ends up in a court. What we're trying to do is teach people how to have relationships that include sexual consent without having to go to court.
Yeah. So I'm going to move to Brian with an eyes issue here, because I think it's related, which is the power dynamic. So we've talked about the age dynamic, and there's the power dynamic of consent. What does consent mean?
Yeah.
You know, the president of the United States wants a blowjob in the White House. does the intern have the ability to say no? Well, I'm going to say everybody has the ability to say no if you're not gagged. And we've got a problem if you're gagged. But
Just going to force us into the porn conversation.
No, I'm not. We're gonna. But I'm going to get. This is important. This is serious. And there's room for disagreement, and I'm fine with that. I'm comfortable with disagreement. In a situation like that, if the intern goes along with it, quote unquote, was that actual consent? Well, maybe legally. Depends on the state, depends on the judge. But you have an immeasurable power dynamic at play. The same thing can happen with just age. Someone who is in their 50s and is a CEO of a corporation, and versus someone who doesn't work for them, but there's this air of gravitas, say, that that would create an unequal situation. In corporations, it's a little clearer because they have things that are spelled out. Inter-office dating, how that works. In the military, they have some very specific rules that I don't know, but a lieutenant, can a lieutenant date an ensign? Or does it have to be lieutenant on lieutenant action? What about a CO? What about a captain? Where is the power dynamic line drawn before something wrong has happened? And my advice is really bad on this because I don't know the answer. I can easily acknowledge it. You shouldn't listen to me as I say the next few words, but I would say that if you think you have a power dynamic advantage and you want to use that to get laid, you're doing something wrong. And you should not do it. If you in your mind see a power dynamic, then you should be chasing people in your same power class. And if you are not, I think there's something very predatory about your sexual behavior. That doesn't cover all of the bases, I'm sure, but in a situation where you are behaving in a predatory manner, and I would contend that most people know they are. They're looking for the easier marks where they know they have an advantage of some kind and can use it to manipulate. You're doing something wrong, and you should not. And you should really examine yourself and explore why you can only get off with people who are easy marks and have a power dynamic gap between you and them. Once again, this may or may not have anything to do with legality.
Right.
But
I was just going to say, and it doesn't have anything to do with political disposition. So we see a lot of this right now in the news, right? We've got Republicans who are being investigated, and it's made a big splash. The Gates down in Florida, but Cuomo up in New York, Democrat, maybe just as guilty. I'm not proclaiming either of them as being guilty.
He did it.
That's for courts to decide. Well, okay, so David has decided that he's done it. I still suspect that we'll have to go through a formal trial. I don't know. I mean, maybe they'll just take your advice. But it's not a conservative thing. It's not a liberal thing. It's not just a Christian thing. So I'm going to.
This is a human thing.
And,
right. Things dealing with sexuality. Honestly, we can have a theological discussion because it's fun, but this is a human thing. This is why Andrew and I, two atheists, can talk about this issue and cover the bases, because at bottom, this is a human thing.
Right. And atheists, by the way, are just as guilty. I called out Lawrence Krauss and Richard Carrier when they got in trouble. It's not just a conservative Christian thing. It's not a liberal Christian thing. Taking advantage of people is a human thing. and you can't just stop. So sex is a drive. It's it's an instinct, and sometimes there are compulsions that go along that put people in your orbit at risk. And if you are one of those people that has sexual proclivities that put the people around you at risk, you owe it to yourself, because you're not practicing safe sex. You're going to end up with your name on a court docket.
So you didn't want to push back on my diatribe about power dynamics?
So I think I am a little bit. So you owe it, if the people around you are at risk, if your thing is power or whatever it is, you owe it to the people around you and to yourself to find help for that problem. Because sex should occur between consenting people. And if you're a person that needs sex in a non-consenting relationship, get help.
Right. And this becomes
And I don't care what
because,
the non-consensual issue is. It can be power. It can be anything else.
Yeah. One of the reasons why this kind of power dynamic discussion is difficult is because we assume, well, it's men with the power and they're just trying to abuse it. But you've got to think about the other side of this too. You can't let women off the hook. A lot of women are attracted to power. They seek men with power because they get off on that. There's many boys, there's many girls who have crushes on their teachers as boys.
Sure.
And so, yes, no teacher should ever give in to that power dynamic, really bad news situation. But the fact is that was, quite possibly initiated in the other way around that we're thinking about. And so it might be the person without the power seeking the relationship with the person with the power, and I still think that represents some kind of maybe psychological issue that should be considered. But you can definitely have consenting adults that are in the student teacher category, and we'll just use university as opposed to high school so we can get out of the age part of that. But you still have a power dynamic problem at the end of the day. And can you have a consenting relationship that way with no problems? Yes, it's possible. And this is why I say I don't really have any great answers on this. But when I look at that kind of relationship as an outsider, I am just having to wonder what feeds into this that makes these people not more comfortable in a asymmetric relationship than in a symmetric relationship.
Sure. And this is a really tricky one, right? Because it's not just power. It can be money. It can be who has the drugs. It can be who has a stable place to live. It can be, I just happen to like guys that wear wife beaters and drive trucks. They're also, maybe that one's over trivializing the subject, but my point is that power differential can occur in all kinds of places. It can occur based on spiritual authority. Right. And so these power differentials, to be fair to Brian with an eyes question, these sorts of power struggles, we do a good job of being able to identify what the problem is. How to solve it is a much bigger issue. And age is one of those really well recognized places where power differential is it's just very easy for it to show up. An 18-year-old is more world aware than a 13-year-old.
Sure.
And that just manifests itself as power in the relationship.
Right. No, it's so easy for us to judge, but to judge incorrectly. We see a 25-year-old woman and a 65-year-old man, and we think, okay, well, that man is exploiting the 25-year-old woman, and it could be the other way around.
Yeah, I know of a situation right now where it is the other way around.
Right. So it is a very challenging. This whole idea of consent. I'm not trying to prosecute any of this. I'm just trying to lay out the issues and why it's a lot more complicated than it seems on the surface. And I want to spare the rest of the time we have. We're not going to get to issue 4. and we're not going to do issue 3 justice, but I want to get to it. Non-binary sexuality. So you can have the last word on consent, and we will gloss the non-binary subject. We do have a plan, although I'm not sure how well it's nailed down yet, to talk to someone who is a trans person and
That's
do
right.
an interview with them. And so we're working on that. So some of this conversation can be deferred.
So on age and consent, I want to just briefly mention something that we haven't talked about. This will be controversial, and the panel will probably have to pick it up. I suspect you will have one thing to say about it, at least a paragraph or two. We do a poor job at teaching people about consent because, in general, we do a poor job at sex education. As a humanist, at least I'm happy to wear that label for this part of the conversation. As a humanist, we need to do a better job at sex education. We need better sex education in school, and we need better sex education at home. And in that way, when we teach our children, our young adults, what their bodies are, we allow them to talk openly about their bodies, about their emotions and feelings, their desires and urges. Only when we can have those conversations and have them clearly and distinctly and in a caring environment, do we have a chance, only at that time, do we have a chance of having better conversations about consent. Why? Because the topic is sex. And if you don't know how to talk about it, you don't know how to talk about consent. If you can't even say, I don't want your penis in my vagina, you're going to have a hard time talking about consent. You don't have to use those words. And I'm not suggesting that sexual encounters have to be vulgar, but what I am saying is you got to be able to say yes and no clearly. And in order to do that, you have to be well educated. And if you think that sex education doesn't belong in schools, okay, fine. Maybe it doesn't belong in your school system. I think you're wrong. I think it does. But if you think it doesn't, then you are taking, parents, you are taking the responsibility on yourselves to teach your young guys and young women about sex, and to do it in a responsible way where they can keep themselves out of danger. And so if you refuse to allow sex education in schools and you don't do it at home, you get what you pay for. And quite frankly, that's a sexual epidemic in the news. And so don't blame the school systems when you're not doing your job at home. And if you want a better job done, let's open this thing up. Okay. There it is.
I'm gonna defer and move to the what's gonna be our final topic here. Okay. So non-binary sexuality. Here's what I mean by non-binary sexuality. I mean anything that is not a man and a woman fucking in a missionary position and having internal a cream pie to have a baby. That's anything other than that almost kind of falls in this category. And yes, broadly, I want to talk about LGBTQ, but I just want to say that even within heterosexuality, there's a lot of confusion about what's okay and what's not okay. So, so I guess I will kind of speak to the sex education thing a little bit. I think one of the reasons we can't in this society agree on sex education is because we can't agree on what constitutes good sex. And there is a little bit more of a religious divide there. So but not entirely. So it doesn't exactly follow along religious lines, but you can kind of see the religious lines a little bit clearer when we get to this. So what constitutes good sex? Well, sex during marriage in particular procreative sex, is good sex. And so one group would say, well, yeah, sex education. You should educate them to not have sex until they're married. And that all sex prior to that is bad. So that's one faction. Another faction is, what do you mean? No, sex before marriage is not bad. And it's also natural and it's going to happen whether you think it's bad or not. And so what we need to do is give people the knowledge and the tools to have sex safely. And it is very hard, if not impossible, for those two factions to meet.
It is. Abstinence education. So I actually understand the Christian position here, I think. And abstinence education will work on some small portion of the Christian population.
Yeah, how well did it work for you?
Okay, so you don't really want the answer to that.
No, I just wanted to put it out there.
Right, and there are others who would not appreciate me giving an answer to that question. So I will just, I'm just going to have to leave that where it is. Yeah. So
I'm a bad man. You knew that before you took the mic.
Yeah. So abstinence education. As I was a very conservative Christian, it did not work for me. And by the way, I don't know any guys in my running circle that were Christians that it worked for.
Yeah, I don't know a single guy that was abstinent before marriage because of abstinence education. If they were abstinent before marriage, it's because they couldn't get a girl to agree with them to have sex.
Right. So I can only say that there is a small segment of Christian children that abstinence education will work for, and why it works doesn't matter. Do they not have a particularly strong sex drive? Do they really, really love God? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter why they wait. Abstinence education might work. But if you think that you can get abstinence education to work for all children that are in a public school system, particularly any sizable public school system. If you think abstinence education is going to work for thousands of kids, you're just not being realistic. You're just not.
Frankly, I think abstinence education should have no part of the public school agenda at all. I think it is not only not scientific, I think it's unhealthy. I think it's wrong. And so even if you could manipulate some kids into not having sex with abstinence education, you're doing a wrong thing to do it. Come at me. I'm right here, skepticsandseekers.squarespace.com. I'm ready.
So I'm
here all week.
I'm going to rejoin just slightly. Look, abstinence works to not get pregnant. It just does. You don't have sex, you don't get pregnant. Unless you. No, I'm not going to do that. Never mind. We're going to not be really.
Well, honestly, it doesn't, right? Because I mean, there are all kinds of virgin births that happen.
Okay. See, I was not going to talk about the turkey baster, but you're not going to leave me any choice.
I'm just saying, she got pregnant from the toilet seat. Really, it was the toilet seat.
Look, dude. I tried the whole show not to, and then there it is. Okay, but it went a long time. Gonna leave that alone.
Okay.
Getting a little punchy.
We will be climaxing here soon. So, but before we do, we are going to get into the non-binary conversation. But go ahead and finish your thought.
Well, okay. So just that you may even get kids through abstinence education to wait through the early stages of those urges. Maybe. I don't think so. I think in general, abstinence education, particularly is practiced from a religious perspective, where you say where the importance of abstinence is as a result of some God who's watching you, right? You can just forget it. Most kids And even the very conservative ones give in to their urges, even if God's watching, because they know they have a repentance card that's a get out of jail free the next day. That's the truth coming from someone who had abstinence preached over and over and over. Two people. I'm quite positive, David, you had the same experience. So at any rate, abstinence education might work for a small percentage of kids. I won't even deny that. But it's not a small percentage of kids who are at risk. It's all the kids you care about. And hopefully those kids don't, hopefully the only kids you care about are not just the ones wearing promise rings.
Yeah, and I frankly just don't think it's psychologically healthy, let alone physically healthy. I don't think it's physically healthy either, by the way, but I don't think it's psychologically healthy, because the reason you would preach abstinence is because of religion, and as Dale would have said, because you believe that there's some kind of spiritual good in remaining abstinent, and so if a school teaches this, then what they're really doing is walking down the religious path of teaching religion via the back door, if you will.
You know what's funny about this purity culture? And we haven't gotten into purity and innocence. It's going to have to remain for the
panel
for the panel, right?
Mm.
But I just want to relate to that. You knew at least one of these girls. I knew 3 girls in high school who wore promise rings. So for those of you who are not products of the 70s and 80s promise rings, girls wore these little rings that they would pick out, and they would just name them promise rings. And it was
It's like
the
a
idea.
voluntary betrothal.
That's right. And you were guaranteeing that you were going to wait to have sex until marriage. I think 3 of them that were having sex and wearing promise rings. The purity culture it's a failure. It's a big sham, and you can't guilt your kids. You can't guilt your kids out of sex.
Right.
By the way, I do not agree. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I've got a lot to say about the purity culture, but I'm just going to defer for another show. So,
earlier you mentioned masturbation and that you thought of it as sex. I'll say that I actually don't. And if I caught a child, or if hypothetically in the past I had caught a child, I would not think of that as sex. So when I say sex, I am really shorthanding sexual intercourse. Almost every time I say it.
We grew up in 2 different houses, though.
Yeah.
So I can I'll relate this story. I don't have to. We really are going to get to the non-binary conversation. I want to get out of this conversation right now. I want to put it on the board and let the audience have at it. But I'll share this story. This is probably about as personal as I'm going to get in this whole series. But when I was, I want to say 16 or 17, I was not in town for reasons, but when I came home, my parents were they were with some family friends of ours, preacher friends of ours, in fact. Preacher at a church
of course
that
they
I
would be
fairly regularly preached at. We attended from time to time, and we were close friends in that way. Well, I discovered that while I was gone, my parents, with the help of their friends, went through my room and found my porn stash.
Oh, I can so see that happening.
And I had a righteously epic stash. And so
righteous porn.
I will tell you right now, to this day, a very small part of me despises my parents for that. It was extremely traumatic. First of all, that they would even care to look, because why are you looking? Of course I have some. But that they would bring these people into it as well. Yeah. It's not like they stumbled upon it. It's not like I left it on the coffee table. That's not what happened at all. It was a concerted search. And it was the most wrong thing of all the wrong things that I think my parents have done. It's the most wrong thing they've ever done. And so if you want to talk about the messaging And you say, well,
Yeah.
no, that this purity thing is about not having sex before marriage. Well, no, it's more than that. Because I wasn't having sex before marriage. I was knocking one off with porn from time to time. But that was wrong too. So when you hear this purity culture bullshit, you need to recognize what bullshit it really is. These are from sexually repressed people who have some very messed up, wackadoo religious ideas about sex, and they're not approving of masturbation any more than they're approving the sexual act. And
Right.
these are the people who want to be in control of sex education in school. Never. I will oppose that to my dying breath, because I know who these people are.
Yeah. So, well, okay. Little self revelation. When I was a teen, I don't actually remember how old I was, but I was a teen. I was still living at home. I had some condoms, and as I recall, at this particular time, I was not sexually active. I mean, it's every guy's dream to be sexually active, and some of us, there was this time where some guys would walk around with a condom in their billfold because you could put your billfold in your back pocket, and then it's this whole ridiculous thing.
Absolutely.
So anyway,
you would open your wallet and someone might happen to notice, oh, you have a condom.
Right. Hey, there's a bathroom over there. What are we waiting for?
Right. Because the message is, I have the potential for having some sex tonight. What's in your wallet?
Right. That was very well played. So my dad did what your parents did, and my dad had no reservations at all about saying, "I'll search your rooms." Dad's whole Navy guy, and he found these condoms, and so this is when Dad, after he's found condoms in my room, this is when my dad thinks it's time to have the birds and the bees talk, and the birds and the bees talk from my dad's perspective is abstinence. So he watched as I threw them away, right? And he's just absolutely outraged I might consider having sex. And then the birds and the bees talk is what sex is and why I should avoid it. And the whole time I'm just thinking, Dad, I got the birds and the bees talk in the locker room a long time ago. And I don't know why you're wasting your breath. Fine, you're pissed off over the condoms, and you made me throw them away. But I really don't see why we're having to talk about it, because it should be clear to you, dear Dad, that having the birds and the bees talk, the time for that is way past, dude. It's way gone.
Yeah.
So anyway, I share that sort of, parents can just wreck these things. Because we're not getting to number 4, I have to know, was the porn collection righteous because it was Mormon girls, or was it? Okay, you're not going to answer that.
I'm not going to speak to that issue, but I will tell you this: that that stash today would fetch a pretty penny. So.
Yeah,
I think that some of it may, kind of like comic books, have gotten more valuable over time. That's all.
And the trouble is, you never keep them in the original wrappers, man.
No.
They never stay
No,
in
it's
the
not.
wrappers.
It's not that kind of collection. So
Guaranteed sanitized before sale.
the pages are a little yellowed, not necessarily from age. So where was I? Sorry, you non-binary people. That's the segue you get. So this is a serious issue, and I recognize that this will be covered in other shows as well. But I just wanted to dig around and see where the bodies are buried here. So first of all, there is in the religious realm, particularly, and this is one place where religion really does. There really is a religious non-religious divide. So I do think it breaks down pretty much like that, with rare exceptions outside of that. Religious people are all into heteronormalcy,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
they believe that there is something wrong with non-hetero activity.
Yeah.
And there also seems to be a greater emphasis on homosexual males as being particularly bad rather than homosexual females.
Yeah, we know why that is.
And yet we have a far greater number of at least bi females. In fact, some experts used to say all women are naturally bi. And they're only culturally heterosexual. I don't know if that's true. That may be taking it a bit too far, but it does seem it's really easy to find a bi female, you know, and that doesn't seem to get the kind of condemnation. Women having sex with other women just doesn't raise the ire as much as men having sex with men. So I've always wondered about that, and I wonder if the problem isn't the fact that men are the ones who are making these laws, and for them there's just a certain ick factor to it, whereas when it comes to lesbian sex, there is no ick factor whatsoever.
Right.
We're in favor of that.
And I think it's particularly the male penis. It's ejaculation. It's sperm, right? It's just a guy coming in the girl that you might date in the future. And here's why I think so. We don't care about, generally speaking, girls can have sex with other girls, and that is fine. The digital penetration seems to be okay. Toys aren't off limits. There's a lot of acceptance. Now I realize that not everybody accepts all of that, and I'm not suggesting that everybody does. So if you're putting on your righteous indignation hat and you're saying, "Oh well, Andrew, I really don't agree with any of that. I'm the best possible." Well, if you don't agree, fine. I'm not talking to you. But what I am saying is, David, I agree with you that I think girls having sex with girls is much more widely accepted. And the problem isn't even penetration, because dildos are okay. Digital penetration seems to be okay. What's not okay is some girl having sex with some other guy.
All right. We don't want
Sexual intercourse
with
some other guy.
Or
some guy having sex with some other guy.
Right. So in terms of homosexuality, I think that male on male does get the brunt of this, even though Christians don't often say it. But I mean, we know that it's true. We have laws, in some cases still in the books, anti-sodomy laws.
Right.
So in this country, sodomy was something that was punishable by death once upon a time. Especially in the Bible Belt. Sodomy, it's a big deal. Great Britain, homosexuality was illegal, but we associate sodomy with homosexuality, and our laws are clearly associated with homosexuality, because no one seems to think it's illegal for a heterosexual couple to have anal sex. That's not what anyone means when they say sodomy, even though that's
oral sex, right?
Right.
Blowjobs are fine.
Right. But except if this is once again why it's hypocritical. If you have a gay couple who the only thing they did was oral sex,
they'd still be
they would have still been executed. Right, because the laws were really about two men having sex. That's what it was all about. That's the prohibition. It's not about heterosexuals having anal sex. It's about a man having any sex with another man. So, and by the way, I suspect that would have probably extended to non-penetrative acts that would have triggered the law. So that said,
Right.
there does seem to be this focus on the male act of homosexuality, and I find it somewhat inexplicable myself. And I would love the Christians to maybe just explain. It's okay to do it on the board. I am not going to ban you. I am not going to censure you for talking about oral sex and anal sex and things like that. Try to be respectful, but it's perfectly allowable. We're having that conversation. I don't even care if you say fuck. That's fine. It's just a word. It's descriptive. We know what you mean. So that said, why is it wrong for two men to fuck a certain way? And it's okay if a man and a woman do the same act. So it says it says to me that it's not the act that we think is wrong. It's not about putting a dick in a butthole. That's not the wrong thing. The wrong thing is putting a dick in a butthole that also has a dick on the other side.
So, this is fascinating.
I frankly, as a non-Christian right now, can't understand this fixation at all. It makes no natural sense to me whatsoever.
The repulsion is so strong. So the first, as far as I know, I think it still stands, the first kiss between a white man and a black woman on TV was in Star Trek, the original series, right? So that's Kirk and Uhura. We don't see a man kissing a man with tongue, I think, until Brokeback Mountain. And I'm sure you remember what sort of outrage there was.
Yeah, I remember. The audio for this podcast has not been the greatest, listeners. I know that, but I'm going to make it even worse right now because I'm having trouble with hearing through headphones. There are technical reasons and yada yada yada. But I'm gonna have to break it out. I think you'll still be able to hear the rest that follows.
So while you're doing that,
go ahead. I've done it. It's just
okay,
everything is over the speaker now. So
it sounds pretty good, actually. So the audio didn't change much. That'll be
right. No, my audio won't change at all. It's that your audio is being played over the speaker, and my mic will be picking that up. So the recorded quality is going to drop.
Oh, I see. So one of the interesting things that you were talking about, it's male homosexuality. That's the big issue, and we had to get to, I don't remember when Brokeback came out, but it's 40 years after the first white man kisses the first black woman on TV, right? And so there really is this male on male homosexual aversion, and I really think it's about two penises, right? It's about both of them having it.
The thing is, Hollywood has always been a hotbed of homosexuality. This isn't new. It didn't start with Rock Hudson. It's always been the case. If you wanted to know where most of the homosexuals were in America, it was probably Hollywood. It was always right there. But it was just illegal, and then later highly taboo to come out.
Jim Neighbors was famously, Jim Neighbors was gay.
Well, John Wayne, sorry, partner. So look.
But actually, I'm not sorry, partner.
But the fact is, it was not even much of a secret in Hollywood circles. They always knew, and there has been a concerted push to pretend like there was very little homosexuality, and so there's the push that people didn't want to know. You remember, don't ask, don't tell. We don't want to know. That was very recent in our time. And then, there's statistics where people would, give voluntary census answers. Are you gay? Well,
Right.
the answer would be no, because if I said yes, I would lose my job
Right.
and suffer all kinds of persecution. And so there was always this push to make it seem like there are no homosexuals. And then all of a sudden we had this kind of almost Cambrian explosion like burst where it seems like every other person was gay and people started coming out. There was no Cambrian explosion. They were always gay. They just stopped being afraid to say so.
It's not like at the moment homosexuality could be slightly more discussed in public. 10% of the population turned gay. It didn't happen that way.
Right. It's not like it jumped from 5 to 10 because we've got some cultural revolution where people are going gay. No, they are not. That percentage has always been there.
As a slight aside, because I always found this funny. I still chuckle over it. Jim Nabors is from a town called Sylacauga. It's an Indian name.
Lee.
Right. Yeah. So right. So
I lived in Sylacauga.
Right. No, I know. So here's what I found funny. So you're familiar with Highway 280. It runs through Sylacauga, and they named. I don't remember when they did this, so you may not know, but that portion of 280 that runs through Sylacauga.
Jim Nabors Highway.
Jim, okay, you do know. Good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what I find funny about that is people in Sylacauga will do everything they can do while the city council approved the name. They'll do everything they can do not to talk about Jim Nabors Highway. They'll call it Highway 280 or just 280. And if you call it Jim Nabors Highway in Sylacauga, because it's such a funny conservative little town, people will go out of their way to say, yeah, I like Jim Nabors, but I didn't agree with him being gay, right? That's the very act.
What they really should say is, I like Jim Nabors, but this road sucks. That would be better, because it does suck.
But it was always funny to me. It was always funny to me, the amount of discomfort that could be engendered in a conversation in that little town, just by calling that little section of highway Jim Nabors Highway. And you could just see people cringe because it reminds them that this person that they thought was Christian growing up, he wasn't, by the way. I know somebody that went to school with him. He wasn't particularly Christian. It was, he said and did all the right things. But even then, the kids at school, and I will quote this friend of mine who was 2 years younger than Jim Nabors. He said, and I quote this fellow, we always knew Jim was a little funny.
Right. By the way, funny was our euphemism for gay.
That's right.
We said that person's funny. What
Right.
what we mean is they're gay.
Right. Well, and the first time we talked about it, Jim Nabors Highway, this friend of mine, he said, well, Jim always ran around with the girls in school. And that's another euphemism for saying that it's hysterical. If you want to go make somebody uncomfortable, drive to Sylacauga, Alabama, go in any store or restaurant, sit down and ask them where Jim Nabors Highway is.
Yeah. So
anyway,
we have culturally speaking demonized a portion of our population that has always been there. And even now in this much more woke society, it's not woke enough. Even now, there are people who are gay who are afraid to come out because they might lose their job or they might lose clients that are important.
They can't adopt children, right? Christian adoption agencies won't allow gay people to adopt children. We have for a great portion of our lifetimes forced gay men to meet each other in public restrooms. We,
Bathhouses.
right.
You know.
We have, there are things that we did to the LGBTQI plus community. And yes, I don't mind being courteous enough to say, I think that's the list at the moment. I don't care if it changes, and I don't care what your gender pronoun is. I'll use it
Let's say
there it is.
LGBTQ ellipsis.
Well, I'm happy to leave them with their I plus.
I don't, because there might be more added today than there were yesterday. So
I'd have to say LGBTQI plus plus. It'll be a programming language before you know it.
You mentioned, I know you're in the middle of a point. You mentioned bathhouse. I'll give you one more small revelation that honestly doesn't mean nearly as much as it does, but I think I will say it just in support of this LGBTQ ellipsis community. So two things. One, I've marched in a pride parade. No, I hadn't planned to. I was in Portland. I was trying to get somewhere, but the streets were blocked off and the parade was going. And so I figured, you know what? What the hell? I think I will just get in. I'll just walk in, and I will get with this group of people, and I'll just walk. And so I did. And no one questioned me at all. I walked for several blocks with the Pride Parade. There was press and things like that. And I kind of wanted to know, what does it feel to be in these people's shoes and to come out openly at this time and celebrate who you are? And what about the people who will see me and recognize me? What will I be saying to them? They will, people will now think that I am gay. What will happen? And I realized, and I was never noticed. No one ever mentioned it to me, but I realized with all of those thoughts going through my head, just a small fraction of what these people have to think about every day, every moment of their day. And it was really eye-opening. And so I actually encourage you, if you have a chance, if you see a pride parade, get in.
We've gone twice here in
Yeah.
we've gone twice here in town.
And don't just sit on the sidelines. Get in there. Get in there and join hands with somebody with a beard named Francis. Just take.
I've got an eclectic group of friends, and I hope that the friend of mine who is going through gender reassignment right now will join us. But this was actually the point that I was driving toward poorly. So I'll wrap this point up. We have done far more harm to the gay community than they have ever done to us. I've been to dinner with lots and lots of people who are gay. I've had lots of gay work colleagues. My words have been far more harmful than theirs, just because I'm an idiot about the subject, unknowingly harmful. We have done things like accuse people who are LGBTQI plus as a community of being child molesters. We suggest that they can't possibly raise children properly. The list of accusations against that community are harmful and hateful and hurtful.
And we create self-fulfilling prophecies with them as well. When we say things like, they can't maintain a marriage, their relationships are more chaotic. And I just wonder how chaotic your marriage would be if you had the weight of the culture and the federal government telling you how unequal you are and what a terrible person you are, and forcing you to run that gauntlet. You're worried about your job. You're worried, forcing you to run that gauntlet every minute of your life. How stable would your relationships be?
Right. If the only time you could see your wife or your girlfriend was at a truck stop in the dark, if the very mention of the fact that you had a wife or a girlfriend would cause you to lose your social circle and might even result in immediate physical violence against you, if it meant that you'd be outed today in social media, though fortunately we're slightly more tolerant, what would your relationships be like? I'm not homosexual, but I have zero problem with anyone who is. Furthermore, I identify with the gender that the doctors assigned me at birth. Now, they didn't check my DNA, but I identify as male through gross external sexual characteristics, just like most of the guys listening to this podcast. However, I've got a friend who started life as a female and is going through gender reassignment surgery right now. Tomorrow, or whenever it's finished, in the next couple of months, actually. And I have for a while now addressed him as him. And if you think that's creepy or wrong, or if you somehow feel disgusted by it, frankly, I don't need to know you. I just don't need to know you.
Let me give you one more anecdote to give the audience a little bit of an idea of how far I was willing to go to understand this this community. This is something I've never told you either. I've never told anybody. So I will mention it here. I'm not particularly ashamed of it. In fact, I'm not at all ashamed of it. It's just never been anyone's business. But I have always been inquisitive, and I've wanted to understand the other. So whatever the other was, and the way I grew up, there was a lot of other. I can assure you. So whatever the other was, there was a point in my life where I wanted to understand. I wanted to know who they were, what the truth was from the fiction, because it's, at some point I started to understand that I'm being manipulated here and that I'm not getting the whole picture about these other people. And so with regard to homosexuality, I have been to a bathhouse, so I can talk about bathhouses quite in much detail. But it's more than that. I've been to a bathhouse, and I got a membership to this bathhouse, and I kept the membership card quite proudly in my wallet. And I didn't go a lot. I went from time to time. I'd sit around and on occasion talk to people who wanted to be talked to, and mostly just sat in silence reading a book in a towel. So,
right.
And that was fine. And if you want to know if I ever experimented with homosexuality in a bathhouse, the answer is no. But I could have, and that would have been fine too. I wouldn't have a problem admitting that. It's just not why I was there. I just wanted to get to know the other in this kind of ghetto that we had forced them to come into. And one of the insights that I will share about the other that I learned during this period of time is that the other is everybody. They are your grandfather. No, really, they are your grandfather. You don't realize it, and Gramps is not going to talk about it, but he's there. Especially at that time, because there weren't many other places for them to be. They are your boss at work, maybe the big boss at work. They are your preacher or your elder or deacon. They were all there in the bathhouse.
Yeah, and just because you and I have some school background, high school and junior high, that's the same. We were both athletes, and we both had that experience of growing up in male locker rooms, right? And for those of you that don't know, when I say athlete in this case, I mean most of the school year spending 3 hours a day in some kind of practice, and that means, and that's not during school hours, and sometimes there's practice during school hours.
Even in the off season, we still practiced. I mean, we still
right,
you know,
right.
there's no such thing as an off season when you're an athlete.
Right. If it takes, there's this old saw about it taking 10,000 hours to become an expert at something. If it's possible to become an expert at locker rooms, I probably have 10,000 hours in a locker room. My point is only this: if you're hanging around with a bunch of guys who are athletes, and I will just throw false modesty aside and say I was a good athlete. And I was one of the guys that was put together pretty damn well. And you were too, and so were a lot of the other guys we were in locker rooms.
Let me just
with.
tell you, nobody was put together as well as AJ. So when AJ
Okay, I wasn't going to mention Guy Steve.
So I'm just saying, you may think you were put together well, but when AJ stepped on the scale in all his glory, the rest of us just shrunk.
Look. When I say put together well, I mean I was ripped. Gus, I'm pretty sure that there are horses in the world that have penis envy.
Yeah, no, he's. I'm just gonna say it. You know, AJ was the kind of guy that made guys like me not feel as good about myself.
Yeah, look, it was enough that every other guy talked. You know, so Gus, right? We all knew AJ. But my point is, I don't know that it would be. You know, some people claim this really strong homosexual aversion, right? They can't possibly even look at another guy, yada yada yada, and a lot of these guys end up in community sports. You know, playing basketball. They were athletes in high school and college, et cetera, et cetera. And I just the line from Shakespeare often comes. Methinks the lady doth protest too much. You know, the line comes to mind because I didn't have a problem in the locker room looking at a guy and saying, "That's a nice looking dude." You know, it didn't mean that we were going to end up in the backseat of a car out in the gym parking lot. It certainly didn't mean that we were going to find each other at a truck stop. But I don't understand the aversion to homosexuality. And if you spend a lot of time in locker rooms, I suspect that you've had to have this internal conversation and just admit, hey, that's a nice looking dude, right? And why we would deny that is something that today, as a humanist, as an atheist, I don't understand.
Yeah, so I'm gonna let it hang there, and there's obviously a lot more that each of us wants to talk about with this stuff. So my goal with this conversation was to kind of set out some of the issues, and with the panels, we can see what issues they want to pick up. There'll be 2 or 3 that I'll want to make sure we talk about, but I like the panels to be kind of free flowing after this initial conversation. Let me hear your thoughts. skepticsandseekers.squarespace.com. It's for the next few weeks, it's okay to say dick, fuck, cunt, pussy, anal, cowgirl, two
reverse
girls,
cowgirl,
two girls, one cup. I don't whatever the memes are there. Don't look it up. Just don't. You're not ready.
Not as a pejorative, I presume.
Right? No,
you can't use it as a pejorative.
Yeah, just don't. You're right. Be respectful to each other, but there are no language police here. And however you talk about sex, that's how I want you to feel comfortable talking about sex, because not everyone talks about sex in some very antiseptic way. Sometimes the only sex conversation anyone ever has is in slang. That's all. That's the only way they know how to talk about it. And I encourage you to talk about it however you know to talk about it.
I do want to mention one thing for you. Skepticsandseekers.squarespace.com uses the Discuss plugin for the message boards. You should go over there, post comments, get involved in the discussion. They're always lively. But you've said, let people use the language that they're naturally predisposed to, which I agree with. Be aware that Discuss does have of its own, not through the individual site administrators. It does have some artificial intelligence and word routines that it will go through. If you find yourself blocked, if you find some post blocked, you heard it here first that it's not being done at the site level.
Yeah, well, I didn't do it. I can assure you, I have zero filters on Skeptics and Seekers. If you have a comment that gets caught in a filter, it's not my filter. And I will do my best to go into the back end of it and put it on the board. So, and
you heard that here first.
Yeah, so I will go into the back end and put it on the board. I meant what I said. But the other thing I also want to say in the process of this is that we need to be very mindful and sensitive to LGBT language, because I will not become a source of persecution. So words that are generally pejorative, like say fag, just don't do it. Don't go there. It's not necessary. Use words like gay, which is fine, or queer, which is fine.
That is the Q in LGBTQ.
Trans,
lesbian.
Yeah, these are fine. But we're as we talk about sexuality as openly as possible, we also still need to be aware that we're not persecuting each other. I just want people to be able to talk about this stuff and not feel like they're muzzled from being able to talk about it in the only way they know how to talk about it. So we're not going to be offended, and we're grown-ups, and so you don't have to say you're woohoo. Okay, you can talk about the itch in your cunt. It's fine.
I do want someone to write woohoo. Just
it's not a woohoo.
I want that laugh. I want that laugh. I do want that laugh. Somebody picked on me in the chat, by the way, for saying bumping uglies earlier. I thought it's pretty funny. So
what I wanted to say at that point is I was circumcised. Mine is not ugly. Anyway.
Well,
I withheld from that at the time. Just want. Yeah, this is what I do for you, the audience. The things that I refrained from saying, it's all for you.
So this went longer than I expected. We were going to wrap this up.
It's over. Brian with an I was with us for a long time, and then he left for a long time, and he's back thinking, they're still going? They're still what?
Yeah, we love you long time.
Yeah, so look, there'll be no closing speeches. Andrew, I'll give you the last word, and then I'll give you one last word, and then I will close out the show by talking about the rest of the season. So
okay, all right. My last thought. This has been a long conversation and a useful one, but I want to reach out one more time to anyone who has had a violent sexual experience, someone who said no, or if you're wondering about an experience you've had, if some sexual relationship has made you feel bad about yourself, let me just ask you again to be your own best advocate. And let me encourage you to contact the National Sex Abuse Hotline, chat with them online, call any hotline. Somebody there will help. Be your own best advocate. Take back control of your life. Be the best person you can be. And I guarantee you, someone out there cares for you, cares about how your life turns out. And if you're hurting, you're going to have a hard time being the best person you can be. So once again, be your own best advocate.
1-800
Reach out for yourself.
1-800-799-7233. It's 1-800-799-7233.
Reach out. Guarantee you, David and I, even if I don't know you, I love you. I want you to live your best life. If you want to correspond with me, I'm the wrong person to correspond with about sex abuse. That requires a professional. But if you want to reach out and just talk, reasonpress@gmail.com is where you can find me. reasonpress@gmail.com.
And skeptics and seekers @gmail.com. If you want to get me, I read every email. So thank you for that. And next week, we will have our first panel discussion. All of this is happening a little bit later than usual because I've had a little bit of upheaval in my own personal life. It's meaningless. I'm fine. Don't worry about it. In fact, no one should ever feel sorry for me right now. Things have been pretty good at the same time as being kind of awful. So it's been a balance, and I'm fine. So this week, today kicks it off a little bit late. Next Saturday, hopefully, we'll have our first panel show. There's so much to talk about. I expect 2 panel shows, and we'll see how it breaks down. And then Brian and myself will wrap it up. If Brian is unable to do that, I will wrangle some other sucker into doing it. But Brian really is the man when it comes to these shows. If you enjoy the after shows, it's because Brian has done his homework to make them good. So
Yeah, he's a good dude.
A lot of stuff that happens behind the scenes that you may not realize, but we have people in our lives and in our groups that do a lot of work for us, and they are unsung. And Brian is one of those people. We always love having Matthew on the show. He's as busy as a one-legged dancer, so he helps me on my shows. He does all of the work on the Reason Press side. Did I?
No, that's not true.
Sorry, 99.5. Matthew is he's a good guy and a hard worker.
He is a good guy. Super good guy.
Always appreciate these cats. I would bring up Teddy again because it may not be obvious, but when she comes on some of these shows, not all of the shows, but a lot of the shows that she comes on to, she has done a lot of preparation in advance.
Yeah, she does.
That she's a full-time lawyer. It's not like she's got time to dick around with us, but she does, and she doesn't just show up empty-handed. She's usually put in some time, and so whether that's apparent or not on the shows, I just wanted to call her out for that. Everybody knows that Dale puts in 26-hour days, and he does way too much research for these shows. Dale should he's a superhero. Just slow down, man.
Yeah, he's a superhero.
You don't have to think this deeply about this crap.
And Dave, you gotta tell them about the last show, man, because I am really looking forward.
So
to The Devil Made Me Do It.
After that's not the show title. After
yes, this was Porn Seekers. That one's The Devil Made Me Do It.
It's not weird. So the rest of the season, it's upon us, really. After this series is over, we have Dale and Val talking about free will.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Get your tickets ready. We'll be selling tickets for the kibitzing room for that one.
That one will be, if I'm allowed to speak, I don't know.
Sure.
I was just going to say that one will be interesting because Val doesn't want to do the traditional, like, okay, I'm a libertarian free will versus his compatibilist, which we've done shows on kind of before. Even on SNS, I've kind of laid out my position. So I'm actually going to have to be a Dale the Darren Lute or something like, and advocate for the hard determinist or the hard incompatibilist position. So that'll be interesting. It'll be kind of.
I'm pretty sure that's like changing sexual preference. I mean, that's a pretty hard job.
Look, you know what? Dale and Darren Lute are so much alike. This is why they don't get along. Neither one of them wants to hear that, but everybody knows it's true.
I am looking forward to that one, man. That is going to be that's going to be good to hear.
Yeah, no, I really am selling tickets for the kibitzing room. If you think that you're going to get in the chat room free on that one, well, of course, I don't exactly know how to do the commerce thing and get people to pay me money for it, but we'll work that out. It's coming in a few weeks. So I'm very much looking to that show, but that is not the finale of the season. That leads into the finale of the season. We will have a brief series culminating in some interesting ways on Satan, God of this world. Just be there. Just don't fuck this one up, okay? You want to be there. You want to clear your calendar and listen to that series.
The Devil Made Me Do It's a better title.
Satan, God of this world.
Look,
I will not let you say that thing and let that be the last word on the title. It is not.
Reach out to the community. They're going to tell you The Devil Made Me Do It is a better
Satan,
title.
God of this world. It's going to be bad. It's going to be ugly. It might be my last Skeptics and Seekers.
That's because the devil makes you do it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm just preparing you now. There might be some psychological damage. So
just remember, the devil made him do it. It's
Satan, God of this world. So with that said, we're going to close it off here. The conversation for the next couple of weeks, it's a serious conversation. If you see us behaving in a lighthearted and trivial manner, it's not because we take this trivially. It is because when we're engaged in conversations that are this heavy and emotionally burdensome and personal, you got to blow off some steam. Yes, I said blow off some steam.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you take it on the chin and you just have to.
Okay. I want out. No.
The devil made me do it.
Means no. So goodbye, everybody.